The Limud Toronto Festival takes place on Sunday, November 21st. Limud features educators, performers, authors, activists, and innovators from around the world. The Limud Festival of Jewish Learning celebrates creativity, diversity, inclusivity, and discussion. Everyone is welcome. All tickets to Limud are pay what you can. Learn more at limud.ca.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Community Ensures Continuity Edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Alana Zakon in Toronto and David Sklar in Calgary. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk to Jesse Brown about social media and how it shapes societies, and we continue our book club with a Holocaust Western. Alana, David, how are you guys doing?
Doing good. How are you, David?
Living the dream in Calgary still.
So we're launching something really important. This is a big order of business for us. We are on Twitter. We'd love to follow you and for you to follow us. Is that in the early days of Twitter? They used to say this: follow to follow, follow to follow, and
follow for follow.
Follow for follow. Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. But like, it really doesn't happen anymore. It's really funny, but we love to hear from you guys. We are at Bonjour Chai on Twitter, and we are launching a Slack channel. A Slack channel is going to be a way in which you guys can chat with us and you guys can chat with each other. We will be on Slack, which is if you're don't already have Slack for work, which so many people already do, you can download it. It's a fairly easy chat platform, and you can just send us an email at bonjour@thecjn.ca, and we will add you to our Slack channel where you can talk to us and talk to other fans of the podcast. I think this is part of our idea of building out the community of Bonjour Chai people and other Frozen Chosen in Canada and elsewhere. Are you guys online in general? Like, what do you do with the Jewosphere, the Jewish internet, or not?
Am I online? Like, which platforms am I on? What is this question? Do I use a computer? Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and like I have a Twitter account. I was on Twitter like before Twitter was cool. Like I was using hashtags before my grandparents knew what a hashtag was. So I had like a lot of pages, like thousands and thousands of tweets that the world definitely did not need to see, being like an angsty teen where you thought that it was like okay to post about your feelings on Twitter.
Everybody join at Bonjour
So I had to
Chai.
delete all of those.
Oh, I was about to say, join
You
now.
asked me a question,
Join now
Avi.
while we can still see those before she deletes all of them.
No, they're already gone. They're already gone.
I still cringe with all my Facebook memories when I look back to 2011, 12, and 13. I say, why did I post that on Facebook?
Well, you can help us create new memories on our new Twitter account.
Yeah, at Bonjour Chai. Check us out, please. Please be nice. Please be civil. Please recognize that all the voices are important. And check it out, and let's get a conversation going about the stuff that we talk about. Before we get to our topic, let me tell you what happens when you buy something from Atelier Lou. Alana, remember a while ago I showed you this little bangle over here?
Yeah, it was while I was in Montreal, and it's
kind of cool, yeah?
The one that looked like a bone around your
Looks like
wrist.
a bone. It looks like a femur. I don't know if you've seen this. Can you see this, David? It looks
I can,
we're on
indeed.
video, but can you describe it? On one side, it's basically
like a thin, I don't even know how many centimeters that is around your wrist, a nice silver...
millimeters.
Millimeters even. Very, very thin. Very fashionable.
Yeah, and then the other side is what?
Oh, it's like two balls. There's like two little balls at the top, and then at the bottom where the bracelet would almost connect. But yeah, it does look metallically bony-like.
So it's a bone. It's actually supposed to look like a femur. It's a bangle made by Deacon and Francis, which is a wonderful British cufflink and other men accessories or people accessories maker. And they have this bangle, and it looks like a femur. And I remember showing it to somebody. He's like, "Oh, I should buy that for my orthopedic surgeon." And I liked it, and I ended up buying it, and I wear it. And somebody asked me, like, what does it symbolize? What's the meaning for it for you? And for a while, I was just like, I don't know, it looked kind of cool. And lately something hit me, and then I realized that it's connected to this week's Torah portion, right?
Ooh.
Jacob wrestles with the angel, right? And what happens at the end, right? The angel does what? Touches his...
You're really asking me to draw on like ancient
it's a famous
history.
story.
The
It's a
angel
famous
blesses,
story, but
he
Jacob
blesses him from Gideon's Bible.
Before he blesses him, he touches
true.
his hip socket, right? And he's injured.
right.
The Midrash talks about. Right.
I learned all of this once upon a time.
See, I have faith in you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And the idea of like the hip socket being a place where you remember your weaknesses, where you remember your struggles, right, was like, oh, cool. So this bone now is my my remembrance of Jacob becoming Yisrael, a person becoming the parent of a nation, and that often happens through struggles and weakness. And so that's the meaning that I ascribe to this bangle. If you wanted to get a bangle like this, where would I get it, Alana?
Well, you can get it at Atelier Lou Bijouterie, which is in Montreal, Quebec. And you can also order it online using the code BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
Has Atelier Lou thought about expanding across the West to become Lou's workshop?
Ooh, maybe. Maybe that's like the...
Well, they do ship, so you can still get what you need, even if you don't live in Montreal.
That's like the Saul's Bagel Basement that was existing in Montreal, and the Office de la Langue Française came and said you have to change your name from Saul's Bagel Basement to something in French, so he changed it to Bagel Sous Saul.
That's very smart.
Honestly, I like the alliteration.
No, Sous Saul, that's the basement in French.
I know what it means, but it sounds good. We're all from Montreal.
So I got a confession to make. I never really trained to be a podcaster. Most of the work that I do, or at least I did before I was launching several other podcasts, including this one, was in adult education. As an adult educator / rabbi, I was much more focused on content creation, prepare a class, teach a series. My job is to be the person who helps someone understand a new idea. The pandemic, though, made something clear to me, something I'd been thinking about beforehand, but was made much more obvious. Adult education is not about content creation, and neither is podcasting. Both of these and so many other parts of our lives are about building communities. If you don't make a class without thinking about how people can walk out of there talking to each other about some point they were thinking about and wanting to continue that conversation, then some essential part of that class has failed. And we've been thinking quite a bit about that for Bonjour Chai, because we've built something significant here, and we know that we want to create a space for the conversations that are actually happening. See, that's the beauty of a podcast. You don't have to be in the same room at the same time to hear the ideas and to want to discuss them with others. So, we're launching a Slack channel for people to discuss the episodes, and we're on Twitter. But the online world can be a cesspool of trolls and overall bad behavior, and so we reached out to someone who we thought could help us think through this potential mess and see if the upsides could be maximized. Jesse Brown is the founder and host of the Canada Land podcast, which has now expanded to become an entire podcast network. Jesse is a veteran journalist and is seen by many as the leading independent voice in Canadian journalism. Jesse, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's good to be here.
Just Avi, please. So one of the main reasons I wanted you on to talk about this is because Canada Land it's a crowdfunded platform, and it's essentially a community. If you think about that, few people pay regularly for something that they don't believe in. And while you clearly have your share of detractors, right, the show goes on and it grows, right? So the first question is, how would you ultimately think about engaging with your community without losing your mind and without becoming so anodyne that no one wants to be part of the community anymore?
You're starting with a big one.
Swing for the fences.
I mean, I'll be that difficult kind of podcast guest that I loathe, who deflates the premise at the beginning. Which is to say, I just want to examine. I'm not sure I buy the notion of a podcast listenership as a community or a subscription base as a community. I feel I'm sure I'm plagiarizing someone who I came up in media during the early days of social media, where it became a big buzzword. We have a community. Our message board is a community. Let's have a blog with a community. We live in communities, I want an audience. I want a listenership. I want a subscription base. And there is I'll buy the premise to a certain extent. I guess I've just got fuzzy ideas or complicated ideas about this, because
I think the way that I see it, and I'll push back on you, is that when you meet somebody and you're the only person who who listens to Canada Land, and you meet somebody else who listens to Canadaland, you have this shared language. And that shared language and that shared set of ideas, and you listen not because you hate the person, you're not hate listening Canadaland every single week. Very few people do that. But when you have that, you automatically have a conversation. It's not deep ties, right? But there are loose ties that bind the people that listen to Canadaland. I remember this happened to me when I was listening to Slate podcasts in the early days, and I didn't know anybody else. And you'd meet like somebody and you'd be like, of course, which one's your favorite? And what's this? And what are these ideas? And you know that you have this shared language, and that is, in essence, a community. And they don't know each other yet until they meet, but that's there.
It's a something, and it's something interesting, and it's something valuable. And I don't know that we have the best language. A part of this is really new because of because it is a technologically, it spans geography. There's a lot of expat Canadians who like what we do and support us, and it's like we have thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people who listen, and yet, if you walked out on the street in Toronto, not 1 in 1,000 would know who I am or what Canadaland is. And if you did wear a Canadaland t-shirt, you would quickly meet someone that would attract, like through the course of your day, somebody would be like, oh, I listen to that too. And there is a connection. And, it's not unique to us. There's lots of weird new ways that humans are kind of organizing and assembling and finding commonality, maybe not community, but something. And the only thing that I can actually draw a parallel to, because it is technologically based to overcome these geographic boundaries, political, like they're not really of a political stripe either, I actually find I find it interesting to think about it in a Jewish context, because I think that finding commonality through shared principles, a diaspora across the world, there was a financial system that united Jews, there was all these different kind of precedents to, creating a people that, this is really lofty. I'm going to be excoriated for this. Is a silly thing to compare, but I think about this stuff, that there was this early way in which people organized and found commonality with each other that had nothing to do with geographic boundaries or political systems necessarily, but or even necessarily faith, that I find instructive in a lot of ways right now as we're redefining how people organize and connect with each other.
I want to hear more about that. What is your vision?
It's not even like a thesis or a vision. It's like just like an idea that I'm playing with, at the risk of just sounding like ridiculously comically, I don't know, self-important or grandiose. It's not something that I think we've done anything particularly special. I guess it's just like, how do people organize and form teams with each other? And I think that I have there is a practical physical sense of community, the people who you live amongst, and it's about your kids going to the same school. It's about having a shared interest in the same park. It's about caring about if there's a pothole or a speed bump, and caring about the people in your community, caring about your neighbor, and a certain way in which, why do I have concern for somebody who, because they live 3 doors down from me? Like there's lots of people who don't live close to me and there is something essential and human about, like, no, we take care of our own, and we should, and we're in danger of losing those connections. And at the same time, I think that most people are probably members of like 4 dozen different communities now. They've got some hobby online that they're connecting with people on. And, and maybe if you are a Jew, your Jewish community is not geographically located. And then you've got these things like a podcast you listen to, which can sound like a very trivial point of community or communion or connection. And yet it does speak to some, I think, higher principles, which aren't about like the podcast necessarily, but like, if Canadians are frustrated that there isn't good journalism in Canada, here's something you can do. And here are people who feel the same way as you. If you feel like there are things that no one's talking about that they need to,
right,
here are some imperfect people who are going to try to fill in that gap, and you can fund them. And we're not the kind of internet community where we have like a vibrant subreddit or, commenter space. There isn't really, maybe there should be, but there isn't really a space where Canadaland listeners get together. I almost feel like it's an attribute that, they don't all.
It's a feature and not a bug.
Maybe. I'm sorry, this is all very messy.
No, we love it.
But I actually, look, I think that the parallels between with what you're saying with the Jewish community and the podcasting, or thinking about it as podcasting as a community or not, run a lot deeper than you think that they do. The only thing is that as a Jewish community now, this deep community that you talk about doesn't really exist anymore, right? That used to exist when you had your own system of economics, of trading, and you were living in these shtetls or in these small towns in North Africa or wherever you were. Nowadays, we do live as a Jewish community with loose ties. Right. And I'm sorry, I've been dying to say this. Let's talk shit about the Jews right now. The Jewish community fundamentally exists based on loose ties because we don't see each other and recognize each other in the street anymore. And when you do meet somebody, you have that connection, but you're not always thinking about it. And it's not an essential part that is the same way that a neighborhood is of most people's Jewish lives. And yet the Jewish community still functions as if they are 100 years old. Right. So the same way that we think that print media maybe needs to go away, we need to start rethinking the major structures of the Jewish community, because we're more centered around these loose ties and around the 20 Jews that think like us instead of the 85,000 Jews in Montreal that don't necessarily think like.
But it is the thinking that unites. I mean, and to me that speaks to the reason why I self-identify as a Jew. It's not because I worship the same God as a Jew in Montreal or in Israel or in Africa. It's because there is a connection that is based on an intellectual tradition and I think a way of thinking, a way of criticizing.
Shared language.
It's not even language for I think there was a time when
I don't mean words. I mean shared set of thinking and stuff like that.
That's right. Which encompasses
Principles.
Quite a lot of division and debate, almost by definition.
Yeah.
But yet it clicks and you understand it very quickly.
Right. So then what happens when you place all of those Jews into a social media chamber, let's say? Because you see a lot of times, and I have a lot of problem with this, and I know for myself, I've had to actually exit off certain Facebook groups that I'm on that were Jewish type groups, because there was a lot of people complaining and attacking each other, and just the online forum can get really heated in a way that is disturbing. What do we do about that? Because you're saying that you don't really believe in this idea of creating, let's say, online communities for a podcast or in general. I don't know. You can expand on that. I don't want to put words into your mouth. It inevitably happens. And you see it all the time in the Jewish community, out of the Jewish community. How do we navigate that? What do you do when people start getting into these brawls? Any thoughts?
Can I ask you a question in response to your question? How many of those divisive flameouts occurred over the issue of Israel?
Oh, yeah.
Percentage-wise,
many.
Roughly.
Probably 90%, if not more. Yeah.
So if we're describing a system of thought and connection and perhaps community that exists outside of the usual geographic physicality of community, maybe there's something to be learned from the fact that it is discussion of geography, that that is the bumping point, which seems to be toxic to
Very
healthy
point.
communities, that it is this issue of land that seems to almost be an anathema to the ways in which we want to relate to each other. And it's actually heartbreaking how un-Jewish it is to me when things flame out into these bad faith accusations, rhetoric, where we're not interested in each other's brains anymore. We're not interested in each other,
right. Hearing
we're on
different
teams.
Perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, dividing the community. I totally agree. David, I feel like you have a thought.
Well, I have a thought because we're talking about all the positive attributes of bringing, the Jewish community together or any type of community together. But these are some of the downsides that can really tear down communities from within and from outside with social media. I was curious, Jesse, if, these are the downsides. Are there any ways to avoid these kind of pitfalls in trying to build an online community together?
Again, I don't wake up in the morning saying, how can I build community today with my podcast? I wake up in the morning, I provide a service. I have a function, and somehow something grows around that. And I guess this is not to negate your question. I guess this is by way of answering your question. I think that if I was trying to do that, it wouldn't work. I think that what brings people together around me and my team is that we do this thing for people. And it corrects towards, we're here to give you information. We're here to give you analysis, and we can go deeper into what makes that work well. I think I think it works well when we are doing our jobs well and we're providing facts and analysis. And I think it works well when we're transparent. I think it works poorly when we lose sight of that service and are instead like really trying to win a point or really trying to carry a flag for something or other. And we can kind of course correct that when we say, all right, I got that fact wrong, or you know what, my analysis was not accurate there. And we kind of like set the terms for discussion. I don't know. I say at the end of every podcast, I used to say, send me an email. I read everything that you send and I respond to every email. That's what I said at the beginning. And very quickly that became a full-time job, responding to every email. And that was, I think, when I was like, I'm here, I'm answerable to you, and maybe there is some, like, this is a two-way, I'm not just talking in your ear, we're talking to each other. And then that message became, send me an email, I read everything you send, and I respond when I can. And then I was not responding to most of them because I was too busy actually doing what my job is, which is the podcast and the journalism. And now I just say, send me an email, I read everything you send. And that's still true, but there will become a point where that's no longer true. I don't want to pretend that we're all, we talk a lot about parasocial relationships with various internet, personalities. A lot of people feel like they know me because it's an incredible privilege. They welcome me into their ears, into their homes, into their commute as they walk their dogs. And I give a lot of kind of personal, more than most journalists, I talk about myself in personal terms. So people feel like they know me, but it's not. I'm not your buddy if you're a podcast listener. We don't have a dialogue going back and forth. We do have a relationship. If you fund us, you've hired me to do a job for you, to be accountable to you. Sometimes I talk to you directly, but that's not actually my job.
I think that one of the hallmarks, though, of what you do, and you've said this, but just to, like, if I'm to reiterate it and see if I'm going in the right way, if I'm going in the right direction, is that you're not afraid of bringing on an opinion that you can learn from that you strongly disagree with at the beginning. And either your opinion is going to be accepted, or your opinion is going to be changed, or it's not, but it's not as a result of you being entrenched in your idea before you even start an episode. And that is, if we go back to that issue with the online communities and the toxic geography, often what happens is that we exclude these people before we even start. Now, the thing that I've always noticed is that the people that are part of the establishment are often the ones, and this to me is shocking, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, the people that are on the establishment side that for the most part are arguing for a certain slice of geography, and a bigger slice of geography than other people, are the first ones that will go and kick people out for an incorrect view. And the people with the quote unquote incorrect view are not necessarily the ones that go and say, right, you are wrong and I don't want you as part of my community. They're the ones that are talking, right? And to be concrete about it, you don't see people that are involved in the BDS movement going and saying, we don't want to talk to Zionists, right? We think that they're horrible and evil and we don't even want to have anything to do with them, right? There are so many more opportunities for dialogue coming from the left and coming from the right. And the right, for lack of a better way of framing it, tends to be the establishment. And as our guest last week, who was saying some pretty incendiary things, having nothing to do with geography but anatomy, we can't afford to lose Jews. Why are we kicking people out for an idea which is now reaching a plurality of the community and will soon surpass and become a majority where the minority is still controlling this position?
I'm going to push back a little bit on that. One of those comments is that I've felt a lot of toxicity on the left just as much as the right in very different ways. And I think at this point our listeners know that I am a left-leaning individual, and it's hard to be in certain environments because I don't think people want to hear the perspective of a Jew that doesn't absolutely hate Israel at all costs. That's a whole other conversation. But I just wanted to openly say that.
No, this is the conversation, and it is happening. We navigate this every day professionally. But we have to also recognize that we navigate this personally and privately, and it's these are harsh times. And forgive me again, I'm just going to kind of like just try to like extemporaneously sketch this out. Podcasting is a shtetl. That is, it's wonderful that there's a podcasting boom. It's wonderful to see podcasting grow, but it is absolutely a minority space from the mainstream tendencies, a place that only works if you actually listen to the other person. It only works if you enter into a conversation with the possibility that you might learn something or you might be changed. The worst podcast I can imagine is, here's the guy who's always right. Join him every week as he tells you all of his things that are right. There might be a fascinating person with some great ideas, and once I've listened to 3 episodes, I'm done. I don't need to hear him be right every time. And so to actually have 30 minutes, an hour to discuss something is like, that's manna from heaven right now. That doesn't, like, everything else is just algorithmically pushing people into opposite corners of a deathmatch boxing ring. I'm sorry, I'm conflating analogies. Are there deathmatch boxing rings? Maybe there are.
There should be.
But everything is encouraging us to pick a side and attack the other side. And I feel like, really lucky to be in a space that is like built to do something different. To the other thing you're discussing about the right versus the left, we're constantly, a lot of people just feel like Canada is just leftist. And then it was hilarious because Jacobin magazine, the socialist magazine, wrote a very glowing profile of Canada Land. And they were excoriated by people who are like, you think Canada Land is left? That's the best you could do? They're not left at all. They're not social. We're not. We're I feel like the show suffers when I speak to people who only agree with each other. And yet we're constantly trying to figure out, there are live and active issues around, is this an opinion that we want to platform? Is this an idea that deserves more space? Is this, like, really what we're trying to carve out? And the shtetl is the shtetl of good faith, and it's getting smaller and smaller, and where people actually are in good faith in conversation. And when I say that this is, both professional and personal, I have, every Jew is experiencing this. It's not, the left versus the right. I had a beloved family member who went to his grave refusing to speak to me because he considered me in his later years an enemy of the Jews.
Wow.
Oof. Right? But this is not an uncommon story. Everyone is trying to find this space.
So Jesse, as you could see sort of between the tussle between Alana and Avi, what I'm curious is how do you get to decide who becomes the gatekeeper in the social media? Who gets to control the speech that sort of comes in or the speech that doesn't?
The foundational, during those optimistic days of early internet, before we even talked about social media, we were in love with this idea that finally we all would gatekeep that. The gatekeepers were gone. And as somebody who spent an upbringing, feeling like, wow, there are like 3 people deciding what I consume in media, and then an early career knocking on the doors of those gatekeepers. May I speak? Can I have a little space to say something? I was one of the most optimistic people that, like, and also coming from like certain kind of subculture, both hip hop and punk rock, and like carving out DIY space to say things or independent space to say things or not having to ask permission to say things. And then there was the internet, where it was not about gatekeeping. And we all were very naive and optimistic in those days about what that would mean. This is what it actually means. What we're getting now is what it means. And I don't think that it's negative necessarily. I think I would rather have this really cacophonous and sometimes violent, constant negotiation about who gets to determine what, and for it to be based on popular consensus, as dangerous as history has shown us that is, than for that to be tightly controlled by corporate, or government interests. Why is Canada Land a node? Why is Canada Land a gatekeeper of who gets to talk or who doesn't? Everybody is a gatekeeper of who gets to talk. You're deciding that I'm on your podcast. Everybody decides who to retweet. But some people have more influence than others because more people follow them. And I can start a podcast just like anybody else can start a podcast. If Canada Land is a powerful space or an influential space or not, there's many bigger ones. It's only in relation to what people have made it into, whether they're a community or otherwise. It's just because people listen to what we have to say, more than some and less than others.
It's interesting you bring that up. There was Tim Ferriss, who is one of the few very, very, very large podcasts that I listened to. He had a 4-hour podcast this week, and one of the guests on there pointed out that one person's doxing is another person's investigative journalism, and it just depends who's the one doing it. Right. And so Canada Land, by dint of the fact that it is, risen to the top and enough people pay attention to it, essentially is doing a form of, and I don't have a problem with it. I think what you're doing is wonderful. For example, in this case, one is doing a form of doxing on the Kielburgers that is basically, saying that this is wrong. But if an individual went and did that, right, you'd get in all sorts of shit. And so at the end of the day, the internet and the social responsibility, I'm not going to get into responsibilities, but maybe I will, or maybe I should, because ultimately that to me is where it comes to, right? That's where I was trying to go to with this, is that where we are now is that everybody feels that they have rights online and nobody feels like they have any sort of responsibilities, right? Especially once you are hiding behind a mask of an anonymous, shit poster name. And that's where the things fall apart. David, who is famous in our little Bonjour Chai world internally, it doesn't come out back, it stays kind of the backstage, but I'm going to put him out there. He thinks that we should have gatekeepers for the whole CBC, right? He thinks that, for all the internet, you don't belong on the internet if you don't have a thing.
I do.
If you don't have something important to say or something valuable to say, and there should be a gatekeeper that will decide that. And that is wrong. But at the end of the day, the only check that we have in day-to-day society is that we have responsibilities. And the anti-Semitism and the pro-Zionism, anti-Zionism, whatever, all of that tends to happen online simply because so many of us are hiding behind some sort of a screen and some sort of a screen name.
100%.
And so creating that shift is where, figuring out where that's going to work. I think that's the next phase of the internet. I do really believe that we are still very much in the early stages of figuring out how the internet life is going to work. We're not even close to figuring out what's happening. And sorry for my rant, but, why do you get to investigative journalist something whereas other people doxing things are horrible? And that's really a fundamental question. Done.
And before Jesse responds, I feel I just need to push back against Avi right now to sort of say, I actually think the social media echo chamber has created a lot of disharmony in our society, both in the Jewish community, but also outside. And yeah, I'm beginning more and more to believe that we need some guardrails. We need bigger gatekeepers to sort of say, not everyone needs to have an opinion on social media all the time. And for the well-being of our society, I don't even think that we need everyone to have a say in everything all the time, building upon each other. I think this is going to be to the detriment of our society and could tear us down as a civilization.
And that's the hot take.
Well, be careful what you ask for. I mean, Leonard Cohen saw the future. There'll be a breaking of the ancient Western code. Your private life will suddenly explode. So that's happened. What to the question about responsibility and who's a doxer, who's a troll, and who's a journalist, and what are our responsibilities? Boy, does it change and shift fast. And when we started, we were looked at with like curiosity and skepticism. We were, to be talking about the private sex life of such an establishment figure as Jean Ghomeshi. Like, this is not what we do. We have a code in Canada. We leave those things alone, right? That was not fair territory to a lot of people. We crossed a line. This isn't journalism. That was the criticism. And you fast forward, and that was before Me Too. At least before that exploded as the hashtag under the Weinstein case. And now we have moved things to say, you know what? We've had a conversation. And there are aspects of things that happen in people's bedrooms that need to be talked about. And, establishment media does the same type of story all the time. Now, I feel like old guard in that I practice journalism in a pretty traditional way, where if we're going to, I don't really care if you call it doxing or exposing or what you call it. If we're going to publish things that were unknown about people, we go through a pretty classic system of verification and giving the other side a chance to respond. And, you talk about responsibility. These are basically the responsibilities of a journalist. And they're not governed by the government or by law. They're not really, governed by any professional body that you have to get a license from. They're just sort of like, not even profession. It's a trade. And we, if you call yourself a journalist, you probably should ascribe to these notions. And I'm the one who's saying like, no, this random doxing on Twitter was not the way to do this. This random accusation or just this, you didn't give the other a chance to explain, or you haven't actually checked your facts, because now everybody has the same tools that we did. And so we need to have more responsibility before you emit these very serious accusations. You need to do journalism. And we're all under, legally, we're all under the same rubric of libel and defamation law, whether you're a journalist or just a private individual, it doesn't matter. So what's happening now is, I think, what happens whenever a new form of mass communication comes out. I mean, Nazism and the rise of fascism came as industrialized media, mass media. We had this new tool, and it was so powerful, and the ability to just convince people en masse of lunatic ideas through propaganda was a new tool in humanity's hands, and it was abused and to horrific effect. So now we have this other tool, and what are we going to do with it? So, David, everyone's terrified. We need controls. People are not acting responsibly. We need rules. Everybody kind of agrees with that, but the crucial point is, who is going to make those decisions? Who gets to decide who gets to speak, who gets to have an opinion? And we can leave that in the hands of government and mass media, or maybe there are tools in civil society. And there's such an emphasis right now on shaming people. Shame is a tool that we have amongst each other. There's no, you're not shamed by government decree. There are social controls that we impose upon people when they're in bad faith. And that's when they're supposed to be used. And shame can be abused as well. But there's reasons why people conduct themselves the way that they do, because we hold ourselves responsible to one another. And what is shameful and what is not is always being negotiated. So we are in the midst of a violent, constant renegotiation. And some of it is so long overdue. Shame over racism and shame over sexual predation and abuse and casual homophobia, casual language that was horrible, recognition of truths that people live, that everybody was conspiring to gaslight them about. All this language that people hate of associated with woke left, it's long overdue that we developed a language for this. And yet, we're just constantly trying, we're constantly negotiating who gets to talk. And I, as a communicator, as a journalist, and as a Jew, I have the same reflexive distaste for lines of argument that don't deal with the content, but basically say, I don't want to hear from you. You're mansplaining. Yeah. You're mansplaining. So I don't, you can't tell me, I'm not trying to hear this. There's all kinds of, because of who you are, you don't get to talk. I have a reflexive, antipathy enmity towards that position. And yet, there is something that I need to be open to when people are saying there are power dynamics about who gets to talk and who has traditionally gotten to speak. And that matters too. So it's hard to stay open. It's hard to listen and to negotiate in good faith and not draw up, pull up your drawbridge and build a moat. But that's the challenge of the time. And I'm not running to government or to Facebook's policies to say, save me. Because I feel like that's more dangerous.
I don't think Facebook's saving anyone.
I will bring this up as a rabbi, right? I do think about the fact that we have all of these rights as individuals, and they're always, as you just pointed out, and as Jews, we think about this very, very strongly, these responsibilities that we feel towards each other, right? And these responsibilities are often underlined and entrenched, whether you're in a Jewish community and you have this spoken to you about, whether you're in Jewish day school or by the community, or whether you're a journalist and you know that you're being bound by a set of ethics, a set of journalistic principles that tell you when doxing is appropriate, to use that term, and it becomes investigative journalism, and when it's not appropriate because it doesn't really affect society and it's wrong to just go ahead and do this. So if I can then wrap it all up and then ask you, right, you get to make a mitzvah right now, right? And you're going to go and say, what is the responsibility? If there's one thing you've learned as a journalist that helps you separate that and give you that responsibility that citizens need to know when they go online or when they talk in public, what would that one thing be to help us all move forward and say, if I can keep that in mind, right, and journalists do this well, I should do this well also because it gives me a good set of responsibilities, what would that be?
It would be to get in the room with the person that you're talking to. And if you can't be in the room with them, imagine that they're in the room with you. The things that people, that Jordan Peterson crusades to be able to say that he wants to be able to somebody says, I am a man and I want to be referred to as a man. And he says, well, I will probably accommodate that request, he says on his podcast, but I don't want to be forced to accommodate that request. Why don't you just think about it from the first place, which is if that person was in front of you, you would accommodate that request. Why would you call somebody by a designation? Why would you deny somebody what they say? If you apply that principle to every interaction, if that person was in the room with me, would I make this comment on Facebook, on Twitter? If they were here right now, would I refer to them this way? If they were in the room, if they were breaking bread with me, if I was having a conversation. So I have been so sad during the pandemic that we've been so lucky that we've been able to keep working as podcasters. It's easier than TV. It's easier than a lot of things. But I'm sitting in a studio right now where I used to host, and I take that role seriously. I hosted people who sat here with me, and it limits your ability to dehumanize someone if they're sitting across the table from you. So now we speak like this over these interfaces, and it's a pretty good, approximation. And I'm going to be more civil than if I was writing a Twitter thread excoriating you for something I disagree with you about, because you're right here on a screen next to me. But I think that you can apply that to every situation. What if they were here? Would I say this if they were here right now?
I love that.
My wife is the first Orthodox woman to be serving as a clergy full-time in a synagogue in Canada. And the amount of vitriol that she gets, that gets diffused so easily by her saying, just say that to me face to face, right? Come meet me and tell me that I'm such an evil person is exactly what you're saying. We're starting a Slack channel because we want people to have those conversations. We want to use real names in there, but you're 100% right that it's not the same thing. So I guess stay tuned for our live events. And, we do want to be having these conversations with people wherever and however possible. Thank you, Jesse, so much for being part of this. I do hope we speak again soon. I hope that we can host each other potentially at some point in the future in person for a future podcast episode. I guess to listen to any of your podcasts, go to CanadaLand.com. You're on Twitter at Jesse Brown. It's not a community. You just say things. And we at Bonjour Chai would love to hear you hear your thoughts on our Twitter at Bonjour Chai, and email us at bonjour@thecjn.ca, and you can request to join this brand new Slack chat.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
So before we get to our book club, our first order of business is to announce the winner of last week's book club book. Esther Clemens is now the proud owner of Gideon's Bible by Rick and Gideon Salutin. We will be in touch to arrange delivery. You can email us this week at bonjour@thecjn.ca to be entered in and possibly win this week's book.
Mazel tov.
Alana couldn't join us for the book club segment, but she will be back for Nachas and the close. So to say that Gary Barwin is an author serves only to vastly minimize the sheer output and variety of art that he creates. Novelist, poet, musician, and composer, visual artist, Barwin has done it all and apparently done it well. He has won the Leacock Medal. He has been shortlisted for the Giller Prize. His latest novel, entitled Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, The Ballad of Motl the Cowboy, came out this year through Random House Canada and is the subject of our third book review in our BCBC series. David, what do you think of the book?
So I found it had a very appealing beginning and ending as well, too. It's sort of the middle where it went off the rails for me. And I should probably preface this by saying I have a bit of an issue when it comes to Holocaust books. They make me feel very numb, especially after 12 years of Jewish education where we got it every single year. So anytime I pick up a Holocaust novel or book or story, I feel very shut down. So that was my trouble getting into it itself. I found it difficult to get into, especially with the clever asides and the puns. I thought it distracted from the main flow of the story.
Yeah. Look, I think that there are sentences, there are paragraphs, there are books, there are chapters, and then there are books. I think at the sentence level, this book worked so well. You can tell that this person is a poet. This person has so many, ideas bouncing around in his head, right? For literary allusions, for literary alliterations, all of this stuff. And it's just being poured out onto the page. Because it's a cascade. It's a nonstop, waterfall of all of these, literary maneuvers, and it just felt amazing at the sentence level to be able to read that. I found that while the trees were magnificent, I found that they didn't quite amount to a forest at large. I was glad that the first 10 or 15 pages of this insane amount of literary alliteration died down after a bit and became a more classic, novel sort of format and an idea. But I don't know. I just I can see the strengths in there. I can see the beauty. I, as you, had a harder time. And I think part of it is because, not so much because I'm numb to Holocaust fiction or whatever, although that wasn't the piece that really got to me or didn't get to me. It was much more that, as I've mentioned in the past on the show, when if there's no real plot that is going to be interesting to me in any real way, I don't care how literary or how beautiful it is, I'm not interested. I'm not being kept as propelled forward just by the wordplay and just by the interest of what's going on. And I felt that was happening. And in this case, it was basically just, let's see what can happen if we mash up Western novel with Holocaust novel, right? And put them together.
Right. So yeah, I think I agree with that as well too, where it's like if the main characters, Motl and Esther, if they had a bit more breathing space or time, I felt they could have been developed more as the characters itself. It always felt like they were jumping around from one thing to the next without getting to know them a bit. And it was only, and I don't think this is spoiler alerts, it's only at the end where I saw a bit more of that I really wanted to see more of the characters.
Take a step back. Describe, if you want, give us a summary of what's going on here in this book.
In this book, it sort of starts where Motl...
The top level.
Motl is a young man who he's hired, I believe, by the communists in Russia to go and try to assassinate the bourgeois. As he's there, his testicles get shot off by a true historical figure. Then we flash forward 20 years into 1941. The Nazis are on the rise and they're crossing. I've just broken the pact with Russia. They're entering Lithuania and his family is on the run. And it goes from his story of trying to escape with his mother as they try to survive constantly by hiding out in different farms. And Motl has always had this fascination with cowboys. And he's always wanted to be a cowboy. But what happens in the book is he starts to sort of see parallels between the Nazis as cowboys and himself, as he describes, as an Indian. And then he starts to sort of make these connections between what it must have been like for the First Nations in North America, particularly Canada, as they were being wiped away by the growing expansion of colonialism. And he starts to have a shift in focus of, wait, am I a cowboy or am I an Indian?
Sure. That's good. So and throughout, the style of being so staccato, right, is there designed to echo the fact that you're in war and you don't know what's going on and things are always happening and people are always dying. And so in that sense, the book really echoed and created this space and this milieu, right, in such a great way. I didn't even mind so many, the first time or the first 3 times that it happened where there was an anachronism, where there was something they're not drinking beer bottles in brown beer, they're not drinking brown beer out of brown beer bottles in Eastern Europe in the 1940s. I really don't think that's happening. And I was that doesn't matter, right? It's not about that. Or when wordplay comes up or he says something,
right,
in using some sort of a literary reference that would only make sense in the year 2000 or beyond, right? Again, didn't matter to me because that was part of that highly stylized thing that at some point the modern idioms don't matter anymore. It's fine, I get that what you're trying to do. I think that it's really objectively, I saw it as I could see where the art was with this. And he is. I mean, I went on his website. Such great, so much poetry, so much musical relationships, right? A lot of stuff along those lines, teaching so much. This guy was prolific. And he was a visual artist. And he was putting out he put out this series that I thought was really cool of different, alphabet in different order. And if you're listening to this, Gary Barwin, I will email you. I want one of those prints. I'm going to pay for one of those. They're beautiful. They were nice. Maybe it's just I'm not the right audience for it, or you, but the leap required to read something purely literary for the sake of the literariness of it all was a little bit lost on me, and yeah, I saw the humor, I saw the art, I saw all of these things. It didn't gel together, and I suspect that it was on me and not necessarily on the artist himself, on the author.
So then who might be the right audience for this particular book?
I don't know, English lit majors that like the Holocaust, or that, right? Like the idea of like, it's, let's see how good we can do this genre, or how well we can pay homage to this genre of Westerns while also doing something which is deeply Jewish. There was a lot of Jewish moments in there. I don't know if there's a lot of Kaddishes. There was a lot of like, Jewish
Yiskadels,
Veyiskadels. A lot of ritual, moments and stuff like that. And not just ritual, but like thoughts. And I liked it. It was nice. It was good. Who is it for? Somebody who tends to read a lot of literary fiction, I guess. Maybe. I don't know. It's definitely not, if you gave this to somebody who looks at genre fiction or, thrillers or, anything, Dan Brown or Tom Clancy or sci-fi or whatever it is, I don't think that those people would even think to pick this up, even if they think, oh, good, it's a Holocaust novel. I'm Jewish. I should read it. I don't think that was for them. And while I'm not entirely in that world, I don't read genre fiction. I don't read thrillers or things along those lines, capers. And I'm not entirely in that literary world of like making sure that I read every book on the short list of the Booker Prize and every short list of the book on the Giller Prizes, and getting all of these, out there into my, into me, that I can easily see this as like appealing to somebody like that, in that way.
And I'm really curious what you thought about the parallels between the Cowboys, the Nazis, the Indigenous people of Canada, and as he makes the connection between the Jews, that came up again and again. It's a very Canadian-focused book, so I wanted to know what you thought of those moments.
So Robert Alter, who was he was a literary scholar who then became a biblical scholar because he started translating the Bible. Right, he was asked to translate one book and then did another, and then he started writing a book about the art of like Bible, what's going on in the Bible, and then he's written another. And but last year he finished the entire translation of the Tanakh, and then he wrote a book called The Art of Biblical Translation. But one of his early books, he talks about in The Art of Biblical Narrative, he talks about like Bible type scenes, and you wonder why there's women at the well feeding their camels all the time. And you wonder why this story or that story, the other. And there's several times in the Bible where so many of these stories show up again and again. He says these are type scenes. These are designed to evoke a larger piece. Cowboys and Indians, Nazis and Jews, any sort of good guy, bad guy sort of dynamic, that's a type scene. That is a classic literary trope. And by putting those two together and then adding in the Canadian element at the end, or towards the middle, towards the end, really is designed to, underscore this and give this, it's not quite a morality play, but he's definitely wanting you to think about bigger questions, which I think a good novel can. And it's not just, escapism where you read something and you're done with it, right? I like that he is trying to make a point and he's not pandering to it, and he's not beating people over the head with this like message, right? It is nuanced and it's thoughtful. I like that. Like I said, there's a lot of pieces that I liked in the novel. It just, like I said, it didn't necessarily stick the landing, but part of it maybe because it wasn't for me and I wasn't that guy to get into it or to understand it in that way. What was your final assessment of it?
It's pretty similar in your view too. I enjoyed it. I did find a lot of the opportunities we could have seen more of Motl and Esther, especially in the last section where it does take place in Canada. I wanted to see more of those dynamics and relationships. I had a good time reading it, but it did not wow me. I wasn't turning each page wanting to find out how it went. So it was fine. It was a nice, enjoyable read.
Again, the book is called Nothing the Same, Everything Haunted, The Battle of Motl the Cowboy by Gary Barwin. And if you want to win a copy of it, simply email us at bonjour@thecjn.ca and ask to be entered.
And frankly, there's nothing so unusual about being a Jewish cowboy.
On the trail to nowhere, all I have is a horse. Even he would leave if he broke free of this curse. All I got's memories, they aren't even mine. The dry wind wails till the song is blown.
Our word of wisdom this week comes to us from Rabbi Carrie Brown, assistant rabbi at Temple Shalom in Vancouver, BC.
So we've been dealing a lot with the flooding that's been just taking over all of BC this week. It's really devastating, and these images that are coming out are really unbelievable in some ways. And there was one video that I've been seeing a lot in the past few days about in Abbotsford, which is a community just a little bit east of Vancouver, in kind of the plains where there is great farmland, that all of the farmers have been trying to rescue their cows from the floods. And in doing so, they've had to get very creative about pulling them behind jet skis and placing calves on boats and doing whatever they could to get their cows out of danger. I was just struck sometimes when you open the Torah and you read the parasha, you think, wow, this was written actually for this very moment in our lives. And there's this really beautiful description as in this moment when Jacob and Esau are reuniting, and Jacob does this thing, of course, where he divides up his family. He has part of his family with Leah and part of the family with Rachel, and they go their separate. They're supposed to go these separate ways. And Esau says, "Oh, let's go together, and I'm going to walk at your pace." And Jacob says, "No, we can't do that." And he says, "We can't do that because the flocks and the herds and the children can't go at that pace." And Esau says, no, it's okay. Well, I'll stick together. And Jacob says, no, we have to go at our own pace, because if we don't, they're going to die. And I think there's such a powerful lesson in this little, strange part of the parasha that we usually skip over, about what it means to actually keep up at the pace, not that others want us to go, but at the pace of what the animals and the children, the future of our community, really need. And in fact, it's actually from that Jacob eventually goes his own way. The next thing we read is that Jacob settles in the land, and Jacob, he makes stalls for his cattle, and he settles in builds a house. And I think that in this time when we're really dealing with all these climate catastrophes, maybe the earth is telling us to slow down and go at the pace of what the animals need, what nature needs, and what our future need, the children that are before us. So let's keep listening to those things to help us do what we need to do to help make the planet healthier.
And now we're at the point in our show where we talk about our nachas of the week, something that gets us or got us through the week, that is makes us feel good and gives us a good vibe. Alana, what's your nachas of the week?
I have a fun one this week, and it came to me in my sleep. I woke up and I was like, I have a nachas. So last night, first off, not even in a Jewish context, I went to my first concert of the pandemic. It was crazy. Everyone was masked. It was at the Danforth Music Hall in Toronto. But there was a crowd of people and a live band that came in from New York, and it was amazing.
Which band was
So
it?
the band is called Lawrence. Wikipedia calls them a soul pop /funk /R&B band. They're a brother-sister duo. And I went there with my boyfriend, and at one point, the band is made up of a bunch of different people, but the main two singers are Clyde and Gracie Lawrence, who are siblings. And Clyde was wearing a Seinfeld shirt and had curly hair. And at one point he mentioned something about a bar mitzvah. And my boyfriend's like, "Are they Jewish?" And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I looked this up a year ago and I thought that they were too, but they're not. And he's like, "Are you sure?" And just as the show went on, they have a saxophone player whose name is Jordan Cohen. And I was like, well, that guy's definitely Jewish. All to say, after the show ended and I retrieved my phone, I looked it up and it turns out that they are. And so I was like, this is a Jewish nachas. I went to a concert last night, and honestly, they're amazing. I highly recommend checking them out. They're on tour for another while. If you like a good rollicking funk tune with lots of sax and amazing vocals, the two of them have killer voices, I highly recommend.
Amazing. David, what's your nachas?
It goes to Alberta Education Minister Ariana Lagrange. She was very courageous in her stance that finally in 2021 she said no, niet, nein, to encouraging students to look to the benefits of Nazi-era German economic policy when teaching about war atrocities. I don't think we need to bring up the fact that the document was published in January of 2020 by the minister when Minister Lagrange was still in charge of the education portfolio.
Amazing. I'm going to tell you a story from my nachas. Many years ago, I went to see Great Big Sea in concert. You guys Great Big Sea fans?
I don't even know what that is.
What?
Great
Who?
Big Sea? Great Big Sea? You never heard of Great Big Sea?
No.
Oh, they were huge.
When were
for
they
a long
around?
time.
In the 80s?
Oh, my God. My God. I know. I'm going to have a yahrzeit plaque up soon. That's how old you think I am. But I think about the yahrzeit plaques, right? I'll say that in the Jewish Godfather, right? In the Godfather's the guy knows he's about to die because their horse's head is in. So in the Jewish Godfather movies, right, you show up to Shul and there's a yahrzeit plaque with your name on it.
That's good.
And you're like, oh, my time is up. Great Big Sea was a very big band from Newfoundland. They did a lot of traditional pop. Folk, if you like the music of Come From Away, you will absolutely love the music of Great Big Sea.
I do love the music from Come From Away.
East Coast music. Their lead singer was this guy Alan Doyle. They were huge in Canada. They would sell out arenas for quite a while. I don't think they officially ever broke up, but they are on a extended hiatus now. But years and years ago, I went to see Great Big Sea, and it turns out that after the show, I went to Hurley's Irish Pub, which is where I would go anyways all the time, and they showed up. And I got to talking to the lead singer. His name is Alan Doyle. We were just chatting, and I was in rabbinical school at the time, and he was telling me, oh, you're like half a rabbi. And I'm like, yeah, and well, I dropped out of seminary. And so I was like, oh, between the two of us, we make one clergy member. And we were chatting that night, and it was fun. It was interesting. And at the end of the night, he was talking to me about my kippah, and I ended up giving him my kippah. I was like, really, wow, cool. And he put it away, and that was really nice, and it was meaningful for him. Years and years and years later, I saw him at a show in Chicago, and I asked him if he remembered me. And he pulled out the kippah from his pocket, and he says, I always carry a kippah with me because this is it's like a talisman of some kind. And then I saw him at another show, and he didn't have it with him. It was his other jacket, but he remembered me, and we always sort of remember each other and see each other and have this moment of people that have a deep spiritual connection, even though they, I became a rabbi. He ended up becoming one of Canada's greatest musicians, if you ask me. But, he still has a deep, soulful, side of him, and we still connect over that. And so my nachas is that tonight I'm going to get reunited with my kippah again for one night. I'm going to go see him in concert, and again, another live concert, a nachas. He's not officially Jewish, right, but the kippah there, right, and it's mine, it's been there forever, sort of helps things along. That is my nachas of the week. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week of November 19th, Parashat Vayishlach. Our producer is Michael Freeman. Technical production is by Andre Goulet. Our music is by So Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our new page at the cjn.ca/bonjour. And you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all our episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Twitter at Bonjour Chai. And as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. and to join our Slack and chat with us throughout the week. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Ilana Zakon.
And I'm David Sklar.
The Limud Toronto Festival takes place on Sunday, November 21st. Limud features educators, performers, authors, activists, and innovators from around the world. The Limud Festival of Jewish Learning celebrates creativity, diversity, inclusivity, and discussion. Everyone is welcome. All tickets to Limud are pay what you can. Learn more at limud.ca.